All right, so for our next lab, we have a problem. We need to be able to measure forces. And if we were in the lab, this would be easy because we have a bunch of scales, which is the force measuring device. And so you can see this measures up to 20 newtons. I've got a smaller scale here. This one goes up to 5 newtons. And I've got all sorts of scales. I've got scales like all over the place that if we were in the lab, I would just give you a bunch of scales that you could use. The problem is that all of you are at home. And so we are going to use a device that you may not realize but can actually be used as a simple scale, which is the rubber band. It turns out that rubber bands follow something called Hooke's law that we will talk about further in the future. But basically speaking, you can use a rubber band as a scale over at least the first part of where it stretches, and the length it stretches is proportional to how much force it is pulling with. And so if I want to measure how hard I am pulling, I've got this one calibrated. I did this by hanging some masses off it, which again, when we get to our Hooke's law lab, that'll make more sense. But this shows that if I'm pulling with about 1 Newton of force, and I can feel what this feels like. That is me pulling with 1 Newton. If I pull harder, now I'm pulling harder. That's about 2 newtons of force. I pull even harder. It's about 3 newtons of force. If you don't believe me, we can actually check that with our scale here. Wrong side. I'll put my scale on here. And so if we go, for example, down to our 3 newtons, so we'll go find, focus. I don't know if you can read it. That blurry thing right there is 3 newtons. And if we come up here, sure enough, that is the line for 3 newtons. If I set this to 1 newton, you can read that one, okay. Come back up, and sure enough, that's 1 Newton. And so this does actually work. A rubber band can actually be used as a simple scale, which means that at home you're going to have some rubber bands, and they're not going to be calibrated. But you at least know that if you have 2 identical rubber bands and they stretch the same amount, that you know that they are indicating equal amounts of force. And if you have one stretching more than the other, it means that the one that is stretching more is measuring a larger force. And we can use these rubber bands to measure how hard I'm pulling on something. So the harder I pull, the further it stretches. And so if I had 2 rubber bands, if I had 2 of them hanging up and I grabbed one with each hand and I pulled them down and I pulled them down equally far, that would mean I was pulling equally hard with both hands. If I pulled one further than the other, that would mean that the one I pulled further, I had to be pulling with more force.